I set the casserole dish on the counter and pretended not to hear. That was my first mistake. My name is Carol. I am 63 years old. I have one daughter and her name is Lily. She has her father's eyes and my stubbornness, and for 31 years she has been the single best thing I ever did with my life. Her father, Frank, passed 8 years ago, pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to funeral. After that, it was just the two of us, and we learned how to be enough for each other. So when Lily called me on a Tuesday evening in October and said, "Mom, I met someone," I put down my crossword puzzle and gave her every ounce of my attention. His name was Daniel. He was 40, an architect, and according to my daughter, he laughed at all the right moments and held doors open without making it feel like a performance. She met him at a charity auction she attended for work. He'd outbid her on a weekend hiking package, then turned around and handed her the certificate because, he said, she'd looked at it like she actually needed the trip. I thought that was either very charming or very calculated. I kept that opinion to myself. They dated for 14 months. I watched my daughter carefully during that time. I've known Lily her entire life, which means I know what she looks like when she's settling and what she looks like when she's genuinely happy. In those 14 months, she glowed. She laughed more. She started hiking again, actually using that certificate. She called me on Sunday mornings instead of waiting for me to call her. I gave Daniel my quiet, cautious approval. What I did not yet know was his family. I met them for the first time at a dinner Daniel hosted at his home, a beautiful craftsman house in a good neighborhood, filled with art that had actually been chosen rather than just purchased. His mother, Patricia, arrived 20 minutes late and immediately rearranged the seating so she was at the head of the table. His father, Gerald, was the kind of man who speaks in proclamations. His sister, Renee, barely looked at me. Patricia was elegant in the way certain women weaponize elegance. Her jewelry was understated and expensive. Her posture was immaculate. She kissed Daniel on both cheeks, turned to Lily with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "So you're the one he can't stop talking about." It should have been a compliment. The way she said it, it wasn't. Over dinner, she asked me what I did. I told her I was retired, that I'd spent 26 years as an office manager for a regional insurance firm in Ohio. She nodded the way people nod when they've already stopped listening. She asked where Lily and I were from originally. I told her, a small town outside of Columbus. She said, "How quaint," and reached for her wine. I set down my fork and looked at my daughter. Lily had seen it too. She was smiling with just her mouth. I picked my fork back up. I said nothing. That was my second mistake. The engagement happened 4 months later. Daniel proposed at the same trailhead where they'd completed that first hike together. Lily called me from the car, crying and laughing at the same time, and I sat on my back porch in the November cold and cried right along with her. The wedding planning began immediately, and Patricia inserted herself into every corner of it. She had opinions about the venue. She had opinions about the flowers. She had opinions about Lily's dress, which she offered while standing in the bridal shop with her arms crossed, saying, "It's lovely, but it might be a touch much for someone with her figure." Lily laughed it off. I stood behind her and memorized every word. There were smaller incidents. Patricia once referred to our side of the guest list as the Columbus crowd, in a tone that made Columbus sound like a minor inconvenience. She asked Lily at a bridal shower attended by 30 women whether her late father had left anything to contribute to the wedding costs, and when Lily said the family was managing fine, Patricia smiled and said, "Of course you are. Daniel's happy to help cover the gap." There was no gap. Lily and I had planned and saved carefully, but Patricia had just told 30 women otherwise. Lily called me that night. Her voice was tight. I told her I loved her and that nothing Patricia said changed a single true thing about who she was or where she came from. Lily said she knew that. She said she was fine. She wasn't fine. Neither was I. The wedding was in June, a Saturday, the kind of perfect early summer day that feels like the world decided to cooperate. The venue was a restored farmhouse outside the city, surrounded by wildflower fields that Lily had specifically chosen because her father had loved wildflowers. She'd placed a framed photo of Frank on a small table near the entrance, with a white candle beside it. I couldn't look at it without my throat closing. The ceremony was beautiful. Daniel cried when he saw Lily walk down the aisle. My daughter was radiant. Not in the way that phrase gets used casually, but genuinely, bone-deep radiant, the way a person looks when they are exactly where they're supposed to be. I sat in the front row and held myself together through sheer force of will. The reception began. Dinner was served. The tables filled with laughter and music, and the particular joy that comes from watching people you love be happy. Then came the toasts. Gerald went first. Brief, warm enough, mostly a list of Daniel's professional accomplishments. Renee gave a toast that was entirely about Daniel and mentioned Lily twice, both times as his fiancée, before catching herself. Then Patricia stood up. She tapped her glass. The room settled. She began reasonably. She talked about raising Daniel, about the value she'd instilled in him, about his character and his taste and his accomplishments. The room was nodding, smiling. Then she pivoted. Daniel has always had a generous heart, she said. He has always been drawn to people who need a hand up. And when he told us about Lily, about where she came from, about her family's circumstances, Gerald and I knew that this was a young woman who would benefit from what our family can offer. We come from different worlds, but we're welcoming her into ours, because that is what we do. The room was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then someone started a slow, uncertain clap, and a few others joined in because people at weddings want to believe they've witnessed something gracious. I looked at my daughter. Lily was sitting perfectly still. Her smile had gone. Not fallen, gone, like something had reached across the table and removed it. Daniel's hand found hers on the tablecloth. He was whispering something. Her jaw was set. I looked at the photo of Frank near the entrance. The candle beside it had burned low. I thought about what he would do. Frank was the gentlest man I ever knew, but he had a line, and when someone crossed it, he didn't make a speech. He simply told the truth, quietly, clearly, without performance. He always said that the truth didn't need decoration. It just needed to be spoken. I picked up my napkin. I set it beside my plate. I stood up. I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment because it wasn't rage exactly. It was something colder and more certain. It was the feeling I used to get in meetings when someone was presenting false numbers and I was the only one in the room who had looked at the actual files. I'd looked at the actual files. Patricia was still standing. She hadn't sat back down. She was accepting congratulations from the table to her right. I walked to where the microphone stand had been left near the small DJ table. The young man managing the music looked at me with wide eyes. I smiled at him and said, "Just one moment, sweetheart." He stepped aside. I tapped the microphone. The room turned toward me. I saw Patricia's head come up. I saw Daniel look at Lily and Lily look at me, and her expression shifted from stricken to something more careful and watchful. "My name is Carol," I said. "I'm Lily's mother. And I want to tell you a little about where we come from." Patricia's smile held. Lily's father, Frank, worked in logistics management for 22 years. He coached Little League for a decade. He built the back deck on our house himself over 2 summers, board by board. He was the kind of man who remembered everyone's birthday and never once asked for credit. I paused. He passed away 8 years ago, and not one day has gone by that Lily and I haven't felt the shape of where he used to stand. The room was very quiet. I worked for 26 years managing the operations of an insurance firm. I raised my daughter on a budget, and we were never once hungry, never once without heat, never once without cooks in the house. We didn't take lavish vacations. We camped. We cooked. We sat at the kitchen table and did homework together until Lily graduated at the top of her class. I looked directly at my daughter. She earned her own way. Every step. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "I want to offer a small correction to something said a moment ago." Patricia mentioned welcoming Lily into a world of opportunity, suggesting that my daughter is in need of elevation. I kept my voice completely even. I'd like to share a few things I've had the opportunity to learn about that world over the past 2 years. Patricia's smile had changed. Gerald and Patricia's company, the one they've built their identity around, the one that funds the jewelry and the lake house and the generous toasts, filed for Chapter 11 protection 14 months ago. That filing is public record. I know because I spent 26 years reading financial documents, and when my daughter told me she was in love, I did what any mother does. I looked around the room steadily. I paid attention. The room was silent. The Lake Michigan property that Patricia mentioned to Lily as her someday is currently listed as collateral on a restructuring loan. The investment portfolio that Gerald described to Daniel as solid lost 38% of its value in an 18-month period ending last spring. I am not sharing this to embarrass anyone. I paused. I'm sharing this because my daughter was just described on her wedding day in front of everyone she loves as a charity case, and I want it on the record that she is not the one who needed rescuing. A chair scraped somewhere. I didn't look. Lily does not come from wealth. She comes from a family that showed up, that paid its bills, that told the truth. I picked up my glass from a nearby table. To Lily and Daniel, to the life you're building together, and to the only thing that actually matters at a foundation, honesty. I drank. The room was still for 3 full seconds. Then Daniel started clapping. Not the polite, uncertain kind, the real kind, the kind that comes from the chest. A few people joined, then more. By the time I set my glass down, most of the room was on their feet. I walked back to my seat. I did not look at Patricia. I looked at my daughter. Lily was crying, not the quiet, controlled kind she does when she doesn't want to make a scene, the real kind. Daniel had his arm around her, and he was saying something in her ear. She nodded. She wiped her eyes. She looked at me across the table and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. I sat down. My hands were trembling slightly, which I hadn't expected. I pressed them flat against my thighs until they steadied. Patricia and Gerald left before the cake was cut. I saw Patricia's back, perfectly straight, moving through the side exit with Gerald close behind. Renee stayed. She came to me an hour later, when the dance floor had filled and the lights had softened, and she stood beside me for a moment without speaking. Then she said, I knew about the filing. I looked at her. I've known for over a year, she said. I didn't know how to. She stopped. Started again. She's done this before, with other people, made them feel small so she could feel big. I should have said something sooner. I thought about what to say to that. I thought about Frank and what he would do with someone standing in front of him who had made a wrong choice and was now admitting it. You're saying something now, I told her. That counts. She nodded once, tightly. She went back to her table. Later that night, after the reception had ended and the wildflower fields had gone dark, Lily found me sitting on a low stone wall near the venue entrance. The candle beside Frank's photo had finally gone out. I brought it with me. I was holding the frame in my lap. She sat down next to me. We didn't say anything for a while. The music from the after party drifted out from inside, faint and warm. I was so angry, she finally said. During her toast, I was so angry, and I didn't know what to do with it because it was my wedding and I didn't want to become the story. I know, I said. Were you scared when you stood up? I thought about that honestly. No, I said. I was just very clear. She leaned her head against my shoulder. She was still in her dress. She smelled like the wildflower she'd been walking through all evening. Dad would have done the same thing, she said. He would have done it better, I said. He always found a way to be kind even when he was right. You were kind, she said. You were just also accurate. I laughed. She laughed. It was the first full breath I'd taken since I'd stood up with that microphone. How are you? I asked. Really, she was quiet for a moment. I'm good, she said. I'm genuinely good. Daniel and I talked in the car for a few minutes, and he wasn't surprised, Mom. He already knew things were bad with the business. He didn't know about the extent of it, but he wasn't shocked. He's been operating without rose-colored glasses for a while. She paused. He was relieved, I think. that it was finally out. I nodded. What happens now? She asked. With Patricia. That's between you and Daniel to figure out, I said. I said what needed to be said tonight. The rest is yours to manage, your way, your pace. She lifted her head and looked at me. You're not going to give me advice? I'm going to tell you that your instincts are good, that your husband loves you, and that you do not owe anyone a version of yourself that shrinks to fit their comfort. I held the picture frame a little tighter. Your father taught you that. She took the frame from my hands gently. She looked at his face for a long moment. I wish he'd been here today, she said. He was, I said. She put her arms around me then, this daughter of mine, still in her wedding dress on a warm June night, and I held on to her the way I have since the day she was born, like she is the most important thing I have ever been trusted to keep safe. Which she is. That was 7 months ago now. Lily and Daniel are settled. They talk about Patricia rarely and deal with it carefully. Renee has quietly become a more present figure in their lives, which I didn't anticipate but find I'm glad about. Gerald and Patricia have not reached out to me. I don't expect they will. Some people, when they are finally seen clearly, prefer to simply disappear from the frame. I am not a dramatic person. I am not someone who looks for conflict or enjoys confrontation. I spent 30 years managing offices and raising a daughter and being quietly competent, while louder people got more credit, and most of the time that was fine. Most of the time, staying small is just good strategy. But there are moments when the quiet thing and the right thing are not the same. When someone stands up at your daughter's wedding and tells a room full of people that your family needed saving, that everything you built, everything Frank worked for, everything you sacrificed and chose and showed up for, was somehow inadequate. That is a moment that asks you to decide who you are. I know who I am. I am Carol. I am 63 years old. I raised a daughter who graduated at the top of her class, who hikes and laughs and calls on Sunday mornings, who cried real tears at her own wedding and still kept her chin up. I come from a small town outside of Columbus, Ohio. I come from a man who built a deck board by board and remembered everyone's birthday. I come from 26 years of work and a kitchen table covered in homework and camping trips and frank conversations, and the specific kind of love that doesn't make speeches, the kind that just shows up every day in every ordinary moment, until it becomes the foundation that everything else is built on. That is where I come from, and I would not trade a single inch of it. The truth doesn't need decoration, it just needs to be spoken. Once you find the courage to speak it, you'll discover what I did, that it was never as frightening as the silence that came before it.